Currently, a very popular boxing tournament called Megalobox is about to take place. The boxers participating in Megalobox wear a type of assistive device called gear. The one organizing Megalobox is the wealthy Shirato Group's chairwoman, Yukiko. The main character, Joe, is following the news about Megalobox while getting his motorcycle repaired, and the repair shop owner says, "Joe, go register to participate in that boxing tournament." But Joe can't participate because he's not a legal citizen of this country. People living outside the city, like Joe, are called free citizens, therefore, they are not controlled by any government, but they don't have citizenship rights either. Joe is currently working as a boxer in an underground arena for the mob's gambling operations. And when Joe arrives at work, his coach, Nanbu, asks to borrow some money because he just lost a bet. Joe often has to fight matches that are pre-arranged by the organizers to scam bettors, and Joe is now feeling too bored because he always has to pretend to lose in the ring. But for an illegal citizen like Joe, this is the only job to make money. Before going into the ring, Joe is given an earpiece to listen to Nanbu's instructions, and he also wears a gear set to assist with the fight, just like in the Megalobox tournament. But the audience and Joe's opponent are surprised because his gear is too shabby. Immediately afterward, Joe's opponent rushes in to attack him violently with his modern gear, and Joe gently deflects his arm and starts to counterattack. But before he can knock him down, the bell rings, ending the round. After witnessing Joe's performance, more people bet on him, and Joe says that if he fought seriously, the gear guy would be knocked out with just one punch. But when round 2 arrives, Joe has to pretend to lose so that the organizers win all the money from those who bet on him. After the recent deal, Nanbu has also earned some money to pay off his debts, but Joe is not interested in this job, so he takes his motorcycle for a spin. Meanwhile, the chairwoman, Yukiko, is watching the construction of the stadium for the Megalobox tournament, and accompanying Yukiko is a silver-haired boxer under her command, named Yuri. Immediately afterward, Yukiko is crossing the road when Joe almost hits her with his motorcycle, but Joe manages to swerve aside, then crashes straight into the sidewalk, so Yukiko is unharmed. Seeing Yukiko approach to apologize, Joe berates her for crossing the road without looking. Yukiko hands Joe a business card and says, "Call me if you need compensation." But when he recognizes her as the organizer of the Megalobox tournament, Joe says he doesn't need it. As Yukiko is about to leave, Joe suddenly says that her Megalobox tournament is just garbage, so Yuri quickly steps up, demanding a fight with Joe to defend his master. But before the two of them can even get close, Yukiko says, "Yuri, come back with me." The next morning, Joe returns to the underground arena to fight the usual fixed matches. Joe and Nanbu wait for a long time, but their opponent doesn't show up. However, Yuri suddenly steps onto the fighting stage with a modern gear integrated into his body. And, upon seeing Yuri, everyone is astonished because he is the champion of the Megalobox tournament. Yuri says that he has come here to settle the dispute from last night with Joe, and Nanbu tries to prevent the fight, because he thinks that Joe can't beat Yuri. But Joe gets angry, punches Nanbu, and happily accepts Yuri's challenge. Everyone eagerly buys tickets to bet on Yuri in this match. And when the fight begins, Joe rushes up to attack Yuri but can't hit him. In fact, Yuri only lightly punches him once, causing Joe to suffer a minor injury on his face. Immediately afterward, Yuri says that he will defeat Joe with only one hand, and indeed, he gives Joe a beating, even though he only uses his left hand. Nanbu says that Joe should stay down when he sees him getting knocked to the ground by Yuri, but he stubbornly stands up and continues the unfinished fight with Yuri. However, this time, Joe successfully dodges Yuri's left-hand attack, and Joe throws a punch at Yuri's face, forcing him to use his right hand to block it. Yuri now truly acknowledges Joe's ability, so he will fight with both hands to show Joe what Megalobox is really like. Immediately afterward, as Joe is rushing to attack Yuri, he is punched with a powerful blow. Yuri's punch sends Joe collapsing to the ground. And he gradually loses consciousness. So the referee declares Yuri the winner when he knows Joe can't get up anymore. However, as Yuri is preparing to leave the underground arena, Joe suddenly stands up, demanding to fight again, but Yuri refuses, because he doesn't want to fight a weakling like Joe. Yuri says that if he wants to fight again, Joe will have to participate in the Megalobox tournament and meet him in the final match. After taking his motorcycle for a spin after being humiliatingly defeated by Yuri, he decides that he will participate in the Megalobox tournament to fight Yuri again. At the same time, Yukiko has also discovered that Yuri went to the underground arena to fight Joe. Therefore, Yukiko reminds Yuri that he is not allowed to go to the underground arena like that again. As soon as he returns to the underground arena, Joe asks Nanbu to find a way to help him participate in the Megalobox tournament, but Nanbu thinks that it's impossible, because Joe is not a legal citizen here, not to mention that only the 4 strongest fighters are allowed to participate in the Megalobox tournament. Nanbu tells Joe to give up that far-fetched idea and go prepare for his upcoming match. And according to the organizer's arrangement, Joe will have to lose in the 5th round today, but Joe doesn't listen to Nanbu and instead knocks out his opponent with just one punch. Immediately afterward, Nanbu was taken to see the boss of this arena, named Fujimaki, to apologize for Joe not following the arrangement, and Nanbu has to work for Fujimaki to pay off all the debt he borrowed from him. So, he is so afraid of Joe that he has to prostrate himself and apologize until he gets hurt, but Fujimaki still wants to take his other eye to punish him. Seeing that there is no other choice, Nanbu suddenly says that he will find a way to get Joe into the Megalobox tournament. And after Joe wins the tournament, he will pay off all the debt to Fujimaki, without missing a penny. Fujimaki also feels a bit interested when he sees Nanbu's determination, so he tells his men to make a fake ID card for Joe, so that he can participate in the tournament. And after receiving Joe's fake ID card, Nanbu goes to register him to compete at Megalobox, and Joe is currently ranked the lowest. Since this is his first time participating in an official tournament, Joe and Nanbu will live temporarily on a boat until the Megalobox tournament takes place, and Joe understands that he has to make it to the final match to have a chance to face Yuri. But Nanbu says, "Joe, don't worry about Yuri yet. Focus on defeating the opponents in front of you to climb the ranks." Nanbu says that Yuri's gear is the most advanced type manufactured by the Shirado group, and that gear has been attached directly to Yuri's body as a part of him. Meanwhile, a group of homeless children have planned to steal things outside the market, and taking advantage of the fact that the owner of the camera shop is not paying attention, they take several cameras from him. Joe and Nanbu go to a shop to buy replacement parts for Joe's gear, but Nanbu suddenly looks delighted when he sees a gear made of titanium alloy, and the security guard says that this is the first model produced by the Shirado group. Immediately afterward, the children from earlier come to this shop to sell the cameras they just stole, and the shop owner gives them a few sweets as payment. But a boy named Sachio is very angry because the owner gave him one sweet less. Seeing Sachio being rebellious, the shop owner takes out a small knife to threaten the boy, so Joe quickly rushes up to stop the shop owner before things get worse, and the children quickly leave, while Joe gets cut on the nose. Joe and Nanbu return to their boat under the bridge, and Nanbu has to train Joe hard, because his first opponent is also quite strong. While going down to the riverbank to play in the water with his friends, Sachio also discovers that Joe is planning to participate in Megalobox, so Sachio asks Joe to take him to Megalobox with him. But Joe is too busy to take a kid like Sachio, so the boy leaves in anger. The next morning, Sachio's friends come to tell Joe that the boy has been captured and imprisoned by the owner of the parts shop. Because he tried to steal his gear made of titanium alloy, and the boy told his friends, "Give that gear to Joe to wear in the Megalobox tournament." Meanwhile, the shop owner is ordering his bodyguard to torture Sachio to force him to return the gear, but Joe suddenly drives his motorcycle into the shop, letting the bike knock the bodyguard down face first. However, the bodyguard is unharmed after the collision, and as Nanbu and the kids drive up, Joe successfully rescues Sachio. Immediately afterward, Joe takes off his outer jacket to reveal the gear made of titanium underneath, but just one hit from the bodyguard shatters his gear into pieces. However, Joe decides that he will knock down the bodyguard with his bare hands, and Joe runs straight towards the bodyguard and punches him down, to everyone's astonishment. After this incident, Joe looks at Sachio with different eyes, so he decides that he will take Sachio to Megalobox to be his assistant. A few days later, Joe goes to the Megalobox arena to participate in the first qualifying match, and his opponent is a rather strong fighter ranked 185th, named Samazima. But Joe competes against him without using any gear or assistive tools. It turns out that, on the night before the competition, Nanbu suggested that Joe compete without gear, because if he did so, stronger opponents as well as the media would pay more attention to Joe, and if this plan goes accordingly, he will be promoted faster to get into the finals of Megalobox. Back to the present, everyone is very surprised to see Joe not using gear, and Samazima, along with the audience in the stands, thinks that Joe is disrespecting the tournament. But the referee declares that the rules of the Megalobox tournament do not require participants to use gear when entering a match. At that moment, Joe tries to avoid Samazima's attacks, then punches him repeatedly in the face. And because he has to wear the heavy gear on his body, he can't move as quickly as Joe. But he just barely manages to land a blow that causes Joe to fall to the ground, unable to move. Below the ring, Nanbu and Sachio are looking very panicked, and constantly calling for Joe to get up, and luckily, he manages to get up before the referee counts to 10. Immediately afterward, Joe and Samazima return to their corners of the ring for a mid-round break. But Joe's mind is so dizzy at this point that he doesn't perceive anything anymore, and the audience treats his group as a joke when they see Nanbu's clumsiness. As the match resumes, Joe slowly steps into the middle of the ring in an extremely heavy manner, and Joe tries to run around the ring so that Samazima can't punch him. So, when he catches Joe, Samazima angrily throws him to the ground, then gives him a beatdown. But Samazima is warned by the referee because his act of throwing someone is against the rules. At the break, Nanbu realizes that Joe is feeling scared when he has to fight without gear, so he says, "Joe, try to find a way to conquer your fear." And upon hearing the advice from him, Joe finally regains his composure. Immediately afterward, Joe recalls what he learned from Nanbu, then moves like a real dancer, and Samazima tries to attack Joe but can't hit him at all. In fact, he can easily throw a powerful punch that makes him fall down. Seeing that Samazima has been knocked out, the referee immediately declares Joe the winner, so the surrounding audience is very surprised, then stands up to congratulate Joe. And that afternoon they happily return home. After Joe's first victory at Megalobox, for a while after that, Joe has continuously defeated many other opponents to increase his ranking, and Joe's reputation has quickly become popular thanks to his use of no gear. However, with his current position, Joe certainly can't get into the finals of the tournament yet, so Nanbu asks a reporter to arrange for Joe to fight a high-ranking boxer, but Nanbu was very surprised to learn that the boxer about to fight Joe is his former student. Nanbu's former student, once a conscripted soldier, is named Aragaki, and while on a mission, Aragaki was hit by a bomb, causing his body to be severely injured. Nanbu was very happy to see Aragaki again, because Nanbu thought that he had been sacrificed after that accident, but he did not expect that Aragaki is now a boxer ranked 17th. However, Aragaki suddenly says that he will destroy Joe in the upcoming match, making Nanbu very surprised, and Aragaki wants to take back what Nanbu took from him before. After hearing Aragaki say that, Nanbu suddenly feels a little worried, so Nanbu suggests that Joe cancel the upcoming match because he can't defeat Aragaki. When looking up information online, people suddenly discover that Aragaki lost both legs in the bombing, and Nanbu was very surprised to learn that Aragaki has been competing with his prosthetic legs. Joe still refuses to listen to Nanbu, because he is looking forward to fighting a strong boxer like Aragaki. In the days that follow, Joe persistently trains to prepare for his upcoming match with Aragaki, and Sachio informs Joe that Aragaki participated in Megalobox 10 years ago, but he had to give up his fighting career when he received his draft notice. However, after returning, Aragaki easily climbed to 17th place with his disabled body, and all of Aragaki's opponents have been sent to the hospital since he reappeared. Meanwhile, Aragaki is training extremely hard because he is also looking forward to fighting Joe, but Aragaki's current coach advises him not to fight him, because he understands that Aragaki is just jealous of him, Nanbu's current student. It turns out that when Aragaki went to the army, Nanbu promised that he would keep their gym as it was until he returned, but when he returned, he saw that Nanbu had turned the gym into a ruined house. Therefore, from then on, he always felt extremely resentful of Nanbu for deceiving him. While at home, Sachio wondered why Nanbu didn't recognize that Aragaki was a top boxer in Megalobox, but Nanbu couldn't answer because he thought Aragaki had died in the military. Meanwhile, Nanbu informs Joe that Aragaki can switch from defense to offense very quickly, so he has also trained Joe on how to balance defense and offense. The next morning, Joe and Aragaki arrive at the stadium very early to prepare for their match, and Nanbu goes to beg Aragaki to go easy on Joe, because the person Aragaki hates is Nanbu, not him. But Aragaki doesn't care, then coldly goes straight to the ring to start the match. When the bell rings, Joe and Aragaki step into the middle of the ring, then continuously throw punches at each other's faces. Unlike Joe's previous opponents, Aragaki can move extremely fast, so just after circling each other, within a minute, Joe is punched down. However, when Nanbu looks worried, Joe slowly gets up, then continues to face Aragaki, but Joe still can't find a way to counterattack Aragaki, because he strikes too quickly, and Nanbu realizes Aragaki is using springs under his prosthetic legs to move more rhythmically. Aragaki throws punches so fast that Joe can't react in time, and just as Aragaki is about to punch Joe in the face, the referee blows the whistle to end the first round. Nanbu says that Joe should give up this match because he thinks that Joe can't beat Aragaki, but Joe twists Nanbu's arm and says that he won't give up until he knocks him down. Immediately afterward, when the match continues, Joe tries to move the way Nanbu once taught him, but upon seeing that, Aragaki becomes extremely angry, then punches Joe down, and Joe slowly gets up as before, then continues to run up and punch Aragaki. During the mid-round break, Aragaki recalls the time when he was Nanbu's student, and it was Nanbu who taught him how to control the balance between defense and offense like Joe just did. Nanbu thinks that Aragaki wants to knock down Joe right in front of him, but after a while of fighting, Joe suddenly realizes that Aragaki has no intention of taking revenge on Nanbu. The third round started with Aragaki unleashing a barrage of powerful, hammer-like punches at Joe's face. Despite being knocked down repeatedly, Joe refused to give up. After getting used to Aragaki's speed, Joe managed to land a punch of his own. The force of Joe's blow was so great that Aragaki struggled to regain his footing. Joe was now able to counterattack Aragaki instead of just maintaining a defensive stance. Nanbu was overjoyed, seeing that Joe was finally putting his teachings into practice. Joe relentlessly delivered powerful punches, forcing Aragaki to turtle up in defense. However, Aragaki wouldn't concede, attempting to return the blows, leading to a fierce and evenly matched battle to the roaring approval of the audience. Yet, as the two were exchanging furious blows, the referee abruptly blew the whistle to end the round. During the break between rounds, Aragaki requested to forfeit the match because he was no longer able to continue. Therefore, the referee declared Joe the winner, much to the delight of Nanbu and Sachio. It turned out that Aragaki had decided to retire after this match, as his health was no longer in good condition. He wanted to be a stepping stone for Joe, helping him climb the ranks. Aragaki revealed that he had never once resented Nanbu. In fact, he was deeply grateful to Nanbu for introducing him to the wonderful sport of boxing. Meanwhile, Yukiko's Shirato group had selected 3 fighters who made it to the semi-finals of Megalobox, but the media was only interested in a gearless fighter like Joe. Yuri also learned that Joe had just defeated Aragaki to climb to 17th place in the rankings. After defeating Aragaki, Joe's name spread far and wide, and he had become the pride of the free people living outside the city. Meanwhile, Yukiko's brother, Mikio, was preparing for a match against the 4th-ranked boxer, and Nanbu was observing the fight from outside the arena. Just then, Yukiko passed by, so Nanbu casually remarked that Yukiko would undoubtedly arrange for her brother to reach the semifinals. But Yukiko claimed that she didn't favor anyone, because Megalobox was a fair tournament. Mikio uses a gear that can automatically analyze all of his opponent's movements, and that gear fights for Mikio automatically, so he doesn't have to exert himself at all. Therefore, after only a few rounds, he was able to easily defeat the top 4 boxer. Joe is going to fight Mikio in a match to determine which of them will make it to the semifinals. Therefore, he wants to train as hard as possible before their match. But his body hasn't fully recovered since his battle with Aragaki. Meanwhile, the members of Shirato are eager to get Mikio into the semifinals without having to fight Joe, because he is, after all, a core member of this wealthy corporation. However, Yukiko disagrees with that idea, believing that it would be unfair. But in reality, Yukiko fears that if her brother wins the Megalobox championship, he will take her position as president. Yukiko is planning to sell the gears produced by Shirato to the military to be used as weapons. Yukiko is the one who created the integrated gear Yuri is wearing, and Yukiko's integrated gear was a resounding success, so her grandfather allowed her to inherit the position of president of the Shirato group. But Mikio failed with his automated gear. Mikio also realizes that Yukiko doesn't want him to become the champion of Megalobox, because if he did, it would prove that Mikio's automated gear is superior to her integrated gear. However, Mikio is determined to win the championship, along with the president's chair of the corporation. Since becoming famous, people want to meet Joe every day, and Joe has been trying to train as hard as possible to prepare for his upcoming match with Mikio. But people are still a little worried because Mikio's gear can read the opponent's movements. Finally, the day of the Megalobox match between Joe and Mikio has arrived, and Joe is determined to win this match and go straight to the finals to rematch with Yuri. But as his group was heading to the arena, they suddenly saw Mikio blocking the exit. It turned out that Mikio had discovered that Joe was using a fake ID to participate in the competition, so he forced Joe to withdraw from the tournament if he didn't want the matter to be exposed. Joe and everyone were very angry after being so blatantly threatened by Mikio, but they still had to withdraw from the Megalobox tournament in order to protect Joe's reputation. Because Joe withdrew from the Megalobox tournament, Mikio will be the last person to advance to the semifinals. But Joe's group returned to the boat on the river to calculate their next move. Nanbu finds it strange that Mikio could have easily eliminated Joe by telling everyone about his using fake papers, so Nanbu thinks he is afraid of something about Joe that he doesn't want others to know. With only a few hours until the ceremony announcing the 4 fighters who will advance to the semifinals, Nanbu asks boss Fujimaki to use his connections to investigate Mikio. Fujimaki says that the fake ID he made couldn't possibly be detected by Mikio, and that Mikio simply caught on to Joe and Nanbu, because the two of them were once very famous in the underground arena. Therefore, Fujimaki is sure that Mikio has no evidence to accuse Joe. Fujimaki said that he knows a guy who frequents the underground arena to bet, named Mizuhara, and Mizuhara used to be an engineer working at the Shirato Corporation. Immediately, Fujimaki had his men bring Mizuhara in to ask him for some secret information inside Shirato, and Mizuhara said that he had been hired by Shirato to develop new generation gears. Mikio also participated in Shirato's new gear development program, but in the end, the integrated gear developed by Yukiko was chosen as the official model, because Mikio's automatic gear had too many flaws in combat. Mikio is now eager to defeat Yuri to prove that his gear is superior. And Mizuhara also said that Mikio's gear can only read the movements of opponents who use gear. So Nanbu realized that Mikio cannot defeat opponents who do not use gear like Joe. Nanbu also learned that Yukiko doesn't want her brother to make it to the semifinals. So Nanbu went to meet Yukiko alone to ask for a rematch between Joe and Mikio. But she immediately refused, because Joe had automatically forfeited in the previous match with Mikio. Joe and Sachio are at home waiting to see if Nanbu can persuade Yukiko. Nanbu threatens Yukiko that if she doesn't allow Joe a rematch, he will spread the news that Shirado Corporation cheated to get Mikio into the semifinals. But Yukiko locks Nanbu in the room and then goes to the opening ceremony of the semifinal round. While training, Joe saw the fireworks of the ceremony being set off in the city. Nanbu called to tell Sachio that he had failed. But Joe then got on his motorcycle and sped straight to the opening ceremony. Along with Yuri, 2 other fighters from the West have also been selected for the semifinals. As Megalonia and Yukiko were preparing to announce Mikio as the 4th fighter to be selected, Joe suddenly drove up. Joe asks Yukiko to give him a rematch with Mikio. As soon as he sees Joe, Mikio despises him like a dog and orders the guards to kick him out. However, Yukiko also knows what her brother threatened Joe with to make him give up the match last time. So Yukiko will organize a rematch between Joe and Mikio to select the 4th fighter to enter the semifinals. And Mikio angrily realized that Yukiko would do anything to prevent his success. Soon after, spectators crowded the Megalobox arena to watch the match between Joe and Mikio, and the residents outside the city were also watching their match on TV. Unlike what they thought, Joe faced quite a bit of difficulty when fighting Mikio. Nanbu realized that Mikio had definitely upgraded a new feature for the gear, and it could now read the movements of fighters who don't use gear like Joe. Joe used the moves he had learned from Nanbu recently to attack Mikio. But Mikio's gear activated a movement copying function to help him knock Joe down with his own moves. During the break, everyone discovered that Mikio's gear has the ability to copy, and if the match goes on, it will become stronger. In the 3rd round, the situation remained unchanged. Joe was beaten by Mikio, along with his automated gear, until he fell off the ring. But Joe is determined to win, because Mikio's power comes from the gear, not himself. Mikio is extremely annoyed that Joe keeps getting up after every time he knocks him down. Mikio and everyone were amazed to see Joe standing still, refusing to defend. Stranger still, Mikio couldn't hit Joe at this time, and even the gear suddenly stopped working. It turns out that when Joe stood still, Mikio's gear thought he was plotting something. So it paused to calculate what Joe's next attack would be. And Joe said he would knock Mikio down in one blow to avoid the gear's counterattack. Immediately afterwards, Joe used the no defense move again to deal with Mikio's gear. The audience around thought that Joe had run out of strength. Nanbu and Sachio are looking forward to Joe's finishing move on the ring. Seeing that the gear refused to attack, Mikio turned it off and angrily rushed to attack Joe. But Joe managed to dodge and threw a hook into his jaw. Mikio fell to the ring unconscious. The referee declared Joe the winner, to the cheers of thousands of spectators. According to the initial agreement, Joe will be the 4th fighter selected for the Megalobox semifinals. Mikio accepts defeat and expresses his respect for Joe. As he left, Joe saw Yuri. He and Yukiko are sitting watching the match. Yuri feels extremely excited because he will finally get to rematch Joe in a world-class tournament. That night, the people in the neighborhood threw a party to celebrate Joe's victory. But he couldn't attend because he had to lie in his room to recover. While they were eating and having fun, Fujimaki suddenly came to call Nanbu out to talk. It turned out that 3 months ago, Nanbu had to make a deal with Fujimaki to get him to agree to help Joe enter the Megalobox tournament. Fujimaki wanted Joe to pretend to lose in the semifinals to cheat betting money. If the outcome was rigged, Fujimaki would make a fortune. Nanbu couldn't refuse Fujimaki, because he owed him a large sum of money. But when he learned that Nanbu had been using him all along, Joe angrily punched him and drove off on his motorcycle. Even Sachio was disappointed to realize that Nanbu had been deceiving them. The next day, the Shirado group held a press conference for the 4 fighters in the semifinals. But Joe didn't attend, and instead went to the old mechanic's shop to watch TV. Meanwhile, Nanbu forced Sachio to go somewhere with him. Nanbu knew that Sachio was also using Joe, not just him. Engineer Mikio told Nanbu that Sachio's father used to work for the Shirado group, but Yukiko's grandfather had his father assassinated to protect company secrets. So after his mother died, Sachio asked to follow Joe to Megalobox to avenge his father. Immediately afterwards, Nanbu suddenly took Sachio outside a mansion where Yukiko was staying. And it seemed she was hosting a very lavish party to invite business partners. Nanbu gave Sachio a small knife and told the boy to take Yukiko's life to avenge his father. But after thinking about it, the boy didn't have the courage to do such a cruel thing. Nanbu understands that if Joe doesn't participate in Fujimaki's rigging scheme, he will surely eliminate their entire group. So, Nanbu asked Yukiko to take care of Sachio until the Megalobox tournament ended. And when she learned that her grandfather had killed Sachio's father, she agreed to make amends to the boy. The next day, the first semi-final match between Yuri and a fighter from Spain named Pepe began. And Yukiko invited some representatives from the military to watch the match to see the performance of the gear that Yuri is using. As soon as the match started, Pepe kept attacking Yuri with his powerful punches. And he was quite confused when he saw Yuri could easily counterattack. The two had a fairly evenly matched fight to the cheers of thousands of spectators. But Yuri successfully launched an uppercut from below to defeat Pepe. After defeating Pepe, Yuri became the first fighter to reach the finals. That night, Joe was standing on the riverside catching the breeze when he suddenly saw Yuri also walking his dog. And when he saw Yuri coming towards him, Joe complimented his uppercut from that morning. But Joe is still determined to get through the semifinals to have a real fight with Yuri. The next morning, Nanbu sent a headset to the mechanic's shop and asked him to give it to Joe. Joe took it and sped straight to the arena to participate in the semifinals. In the semifinals, Joe will face a fighter from the United States named Burroughs. Joe has agreed to carry out Fujimaki's match-fixing scheme. Nanbu is sitting in the VIP room with Fujimaki, waiting for the match to begin. Burroughs entered the ring on a very cool gold-plated vehicle. Everyone was surprised to see Joe enter the ring with the old gear. But they thought Joe was wearing gear because Burroughs was much stronger than the previous opponents. Seeing Joe like that, Nanbu understood that he had followed Fujimaki's plan. Yuri couldn't believe that Joe had given up his self-respect to wear a gear. Meanwhile, Sachio and his friends were watching the match outside. The boy angrily ran away because he didn't expect Joe to agree to follow the rigging plan. In the early minutes, Joe kept running away from Burroughs' attacks. Nanbu tried to advise Joe to help him hold on for a few rounds. But Joe refused to listen to him and just punched randomly. As the first round ended, the match was still very intense. Fujimaki realized Joe was trying to act so the audience wouldn't realize they were rigging the result. As soon as the second round started, Joe immediately rushed to attack Burroughs. Nanbu said that Joe had to last through the second round for the rigging plan to succeed, so Joe tried to keep his distance from Burroughs and kept punching him in the face. When the second round ended, the number of people betting on Joe increased very quickly. Sachio was on his way home when he suddenly felt regret for using Joe to serve his revenge purposes. Nanbu told Joe that after this operation was over, he would be free. But Nanbu was confused when Fujimaki said that they would have to work for him for the rest of their lives. However, when Joe was being cornered by Burroughs, Sachio suddenly ran straight into the ring and the boy told Joe to fight for himself. But Joe fell after enduring a series of powerful punches from Burroughs. Yuri also suddenly appeared under the ring and encouraged Joe to stand up and continue fighting. Nanbu was struggling with Fujimaki's henchmen because he didn't want to do this dirty work anymore. And he told Joe to win this match to fulfill his dream. After hearing that, Joe took off the gear and slowly stood up to fight a real fight with Burroughs. Joe successfully knocked him down with a powerful punch in the middle of his face. As soon as the referee declared Joe the winner, Sachio happily ran to the ring and hugged him. Yuri at this time also had to admit that Joe was the strongest fighter he had ever met. Immediately afterwards, Joe and Sachio rushed to the VIP room to save Nanbu from Fujimaki's men. But Fujimaki took Nanbu's remaining eye, as if to settle all old debts. Fujimaki let Joe take Nanbu away and said that from now on they have nothing to do with each other. Yukiko has signed a contract to sell integrated gear to the military for use in war. The people on the military side are now very eager to see Yuri win the championship with that gear. But Yuri suddenly demanded to remove the gear for a fair match with Joe. Yukiko was very panicked when she heard that. But Yuri said that was his wish and left Shirato. Because he is now feeling extremely excited to finally be able to fight Joe. Nanbu asked Aragaki to be his sparring partner instead of training with a punching bag. Meanwhile, Yuri drove to a log cabin deep in the forest to meet Mikio. Yuri asked Mikio to remove the integrated gear on his body, which surprised him. Mikio told Yuri that removing the integrated gear would be very painful, but Yuri still decided to remove it because he wanted to have a good match with Joe. Yukiko came to Mikio's house after he removed the gear for Yuri. Yuri is now unconscious in a hospital bed. It will take another day to wake up. A few days later, Yukiko saw Yuri rushing into training as soon as he could move. Meanwhile, Joe and everyone are enjoying a day off before the final. Yukiko came to tell Joe that Yuri had removed gear to fight, which made Joe very excited and continued to train to prepare for the final. Finally, the day of the match between Joe and Yuri has arrived. Nanbo gave Joe a lucky charm to help him avoid Yuri's punches. Everyone around the ring was very surprised to see that Yuri was also not wearing gear. Yuri's body was now full of scars after removing the integrated gear. Joe and Yuri had an evenly matched fight, with no winner or loser. Yuri was slightly better than Joe because of his faster punching speed, so he knocked Joe down to the ring. However, Joe still struggled to get up before the referee counted to 10. After attacking back and forth, Joe punched Yuri in the face in retaliation. The audience was very excited because of the dramatic match. They fought continuously until the 13th round without ending, so they both launched a decisive blow to end the match. Hearing the results of the match, Yukiko burst into tears. Joe and Yuri were both seriously injured, so the final was temporarily cancelled. A year later, Nanbu, Sachio, and the other children built a small gym. Yuri was paralyzed in both legs after the final match with Joe. Yukiko organized another Megalobox tournament, without using gear. Joe has now stopped competing and switched to working as a shipper to make a living. But he still has to face many challenges ahead. Thank you for watching the video about the anime Megalobox. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell.